But you still need humans involved because humans have to do some of this work as well, right?
Working at sea is a difficult thing.
Mm-hmm.
There are companies now who are trying to have totally autonomous operations. In other words, the ship goes out, launches vehicles, recovers vehicles. It does everything autonomously. But any of us who understand what it takes to operate at sea and how many things go wrong.
Welcome to another great Fascinated by Shipwrecks podcast. I'm really excited today to have Vince Capone on the podcast. Vince has a very long career in the marine sciences. He has over 35 years of hydrographic and underwater search and survey operations. He is an expert in side scan sonar, side scan image analysis, and regularly conducts training seminars for the U.S. Navy, law enforcement, fire rescue, and commercial clients. And of course, he's also taken part in a lot of shipwreck investigations. It's my pleasure to welcome you here today, Vince, and I'm really excited to see what you're going to be talking about.
Let's dive in.
Okay. So I guess, you've had a long career, so there's not a lot that we can unpack in one little podcast episode, but I'd like to start with sort of how did you get interested in the field of marine science? How far back did that go? And then how did you get interested in shipwrecks?
Well, that's quite easy. When I was growing up, there was a man named Jacques Cousteau, who some of the younger viewers may not remember, but he had a huge following on TV and was putting out, some really marvelous programs. That got me interested in the underwater world, even though no one in my family or neighborhood or immediate circle had any interest in it. And by second grade, I knew I was going to be going into marine biology and marine science. I literally can remember giving a presentation to the class in second grade about underwater creatures, and that's where it all started.
Wow, second grade. So that's kind of been in your blood, but very interesting that no one else around you had this kind of focus. So, so maybe you can let us know a little bit about the shipwreck projects that you've worked on, because I'm sure it's numerous. Are there any that stand out for you, and how were those experiences for you?
Well, there's three that we can talk about, maybe four. So three of them are in the past, and there's one that's ongoing that could be quite interesting. So I can let your listeners in on a little bit of a secret. So we have some breaking news as well as the past. Probably the most famous in terms of shipwrecks was the Lake George Radeau. And that is America's oldest intact warship. And not only did we discover over 100 shipwrecks, some of the modern, in Lake George, and cataloged all those wrecks, but the Radeau was the most significant find. It's a 52-foot long, basically cannon platform. It's seven-sided, all done by volunteers. And we found the vessel. We engaged a professional archaeologist, again on a volunteer basis. We did all the diving survey back then. This is in the early 1990s. We did all the surveying by hand. We literally brought tape measures down underwater and we're measuring this thing. Eventually, it became a park and nominated to the Historic Register. So it's really quite famous. The little known fact on that is Nat Geo had published a photomosaic of the horse ferry in Lake Champlain, which is a lake bordering Vermont and New York. Lake George is all in the state of New York. That photomosaic was black and white, and it wasn't seamless. You could, literally see the different panels from each photograph. A group of volunteers which I am very proud to have been part of, created what is probably the first seamless color shipwreck mosaic of the Lake George Red O. And that was published in 1994 using one of the first versions of Photoshop. It was over 187 color images that were merged together by Ken McMahon. He was the computer expert that helped us with that. And to this day, I have not found another full color mosaic that was done before that. Seamless.
That sounds really fascinating. So just can you give us a little bit of history of that shipwreck?
So we, as in residents of the United States, were provincials under the British. The British were fighting the French and Indians from Canada. The lakes, Lake Champlain and Lake George, acted as highways. There was no highway system to transport goods. So the forces that dominated the lakes had an advantage on the battlefield. The northern end of Lake George was there was a fort held by the French and Indians, and the southern end of the lake was held by the British and citizens of what now is the United States. The fort at the southern end of the lake during the winter had been burned because it was so remote. Most of the garrisons would pull back during the winter, and raiding forces came down during the winter and burned the fort. So there was no protection over winter for this armada of boats that was being built to assault the northern fort held by the French and the Indians. The weather closed in. They lost their weather window. It was October, and they decided, well, we can't assault the fort before, winter starts. It's just not doable. So what they did was they also didn't want to leave the boats exposed for the winter because the raiding parties would come down and burn the boats. And they had several hundred bateaux, which are a small longboat, a rowboat, and they had this radeau, which was a cannon platform with protective sides so that they could assault the fort without their personnel being exposed to gunfire. So what they did was they sunk the vessels in shallow water, let the lake ice over, they were protected for the winter, and then raised them in the spring. Unfortunately, the radeau was the largest vessel they had ever tried this process with, and in trying to sink it, it drifted out into deeper water and was lost. And it was then found by a group of volunteers in the early 1990s, and we did all the work on it. That took place in 1758. So that's why it's America's oldest intact warship. To this day, it's still a park. It's a little bit of a deeper dive. It's about 107 feet. So when we were doing all the archaeology, we were limited to a couple dives a day. We tried to stay out of the decompression range, but it was a lot of fun. Those were my vacations. I would take a week off from work and go up and help with the archaeological work or the search work. All those years, we were continually doing surveys. We also eventually had access to some of early technologies in ROV, which I was piloting. We did an ROV survey of the wreck. The leading archaeologist, Dr. Kathy Abbas, was not a diver. And by using the ROV, we were able to show her things that, she saw pictures of or the divers described. And she could direct the camera to what she wanted. She said, oh, okay, look at that cannon port. Let's zoom back. Let's go inside and things of that nature. So that was the early on, which what archaeologists today take for granted, was something that we were doing with a very early version of a small ROV. And but it was years of work on and off.
Well, that is a nice one to have a feather in your cap about.
That it is. That it is. And another good one was we found this was for Nat Geo International, along with a couple of Canadian friends, Mike and Warren Fletcher, the Sea Hunters, and we found the U-215 on Georges Bank, not far from where I'm living now. That was an exciting trip. They had Mike and Warren had done a lot of background research, so we had a number of sites where it could be. It wasn't just a big, large search. So I was the sonar operator for that, and we were methodically stepping through each area and search a couple miles around a potential hang. A hang being where the fishermen hang their nets up. We also had multi-beam data from the Canadian government that showed that there was like a little bump there, but it was not of a resolution that you could tell it was a shipwreck or not. So we would go to each of these locations, and it was probably the third or fourth, maybe fifth location that we sort of struck gold in finding that submarine. I was the only person who could operate the gear on the boat, so I think we were, running about 18 hours straight, and we finally found it. And then the next day, we were able to get Mike and Warren to dive it, and it was quite a dive. It was foggy out, it was calm. Georges Bank is notorious for bad weather, but we had this uncanny good weather window, except for we were on this old trawler. And the neat thing was, all right, so this was a Sea Hunters expedition. The Sea Hunters was opened and closed by Clive Cussler, the author who wrote Raise the Titanic and dozens of other books. He was a big shipwreck fan. Come to find out, the boat that we chartered to take us out was the same boat that he used in the United Kingdom to search for the Bonhomme Richard. So we kind of thought like that's a great omen. And so we're on this boat. It's a little trawler. It's only like 65 feet long. And even though the weather was really good, you had this big swell rolling through. And so that boat, it took us, about 27 to 30 some hours to get out to the site, and we just rolled our way out. And so the camera crew, who were not exactly mariners, had a little trouble with that, but the weather was good. You just had this slow roll that was nauseating to some, but relaxing to others. So we had this weather window. We found a target. I mean, on the sonar, we were pretty sure it was it, but we needed to get divers on it to be sure. So the next day, we got Mike and Warren to dive down, and the currents were strong. We had to pick the right window. It was foggy out. The anchor pulled out of the wreck while they were hanging. We were trying to keep the anchor buoy in sight. It was quite a challenge, but in the end, we had found the U-215, which had never been found before. So, and that video is still available on YouTube. So if people are interested, look up the Sea Hunters. It's a great little show.
Yes, I actually watched it recently. And I'm not sure if it was that episode where, Mike came along and asked you how things were going, and you said, there's sand, and over here to the right,
Yeah.
more sand. Can you explain a little bit about what it's like to look at a sonar image? We see it on TV, like they're sitting down and looking at this. They don't see all the grueling hours that you're sitting there trying to watch this sort of paint dry until you find something. So maybe you can explain a little bit about what those images of the bottom can look like on your screens.
Sure. So it is a scrolling display. So as the boat travels across the bottom, the sonar in those days was being towed. So we were towing it behind us. and it uses sound to create a high resolution picture of the bottom. And you are, as the boat is transiting along, you're just like looking from above at the bottom as it scrolls down the screen. So you go down the screen and it just keeps scrolling and scrolling, and you keep watching and watching. If you see something of interest, you could click on that, zoom in, take some measurements, look at some details, store that information, and this is all recorded, so you could play back the information if you needed. It is tedious. We call it mowing the lawn. These days, though, a lot of folks use robots. So they chuck a robot in the water and they sit on the boat and drink coffee while the robot does and runs its survey, comes back, and then you look through all the data. But
Right. And so there were some interesting, unique features of U-215 that you were able to identify when Mike and Warren went down, correct?
yes, we thought it was pretty close by the sonar. We did a measurement. The U-215 was unique in that it wasn't a standard U-boat. It was a mine-laying U-boat. So it was about 20 feet longer than the standard U-boat. And from measurements on the sonar, we said, this looks like it could be it. And Mike and Warren, when they went down, the anchor was snagged in the mine tubes. There are a number of vertical tubes that the mines are in, and they confirmed it was, yes, indeed, the 215. So
And I believe Richie Kohler was on that dive as well.
not the first dive. So
Okay.
once we had found it, that great weather window, the captain, Mark Sheldon, great guy, said, and I can't do his accent. He has a beautiful Maine accent. The weather's been too good. We got to get, the boat was not fast. It's not this huge boat. So at that point, we turned around and went back. And then they came out subsequently with another vessel from Canada. And that's when Richie and Mike and Warren all went back again to do more than just identify it, but do some documentation.
Right. So can you give us just a little bit background on U-215, because it was kind of unusual for it to be there on the east coast of the United States?
The mission of the 215 was not to sink convoys. She was a mine layer. Her mission was to go to Boston Harbor and mine the entrances to Boston Harbor. And if anybody is familiar with Boston Harbor, they're narrow entrances and channels. If she had completed that mission, that would have shut down, Boston Harbor, especially if a large vessel coming out was hit by a mine and sunk. It would block the channel for months. The captain, on his way to Boston, was transiting over Georges Bank, which is relatively shallow, under 300 feet. And he noticed a convoy, and there was a straggler to the convoy. That was the Alexander Macomb. It was a victory ship, one of these transports. And he said, I'm paraphrasing because we don't know what he really said, but I have in his mind, I see him saying, oh, well, on the way to Boston, we'll just take out this one lonely cargo ship. And the Americans don't know how to fight submarines anyway. So he torpedoed the Alexander Macomb, which sank. What he didn't know was it was actually a British escort, and they were well versed in dealing with submarines. And the two escorts broke off and sunk the 215, preventing the mining of Boston, preventing who knows how much longer the war would have went on had he actually stuck to his mission and hadn't been so arrogant to think he could get away with, sinking something on the way in.
Interesting chain of events there. So
Yeah.
what is this sort of teasing breaking news that you were talking about?
We may, and I use the word may, have discovered another Civil War submarine. Everybody's quite familiar with the Hunley, which is during the American Civil War, a Confederate or the Southern States Civil War submarine. But the U.S. Navy, which is the Northern States, also was developing submarines. There was a submarine, the first submarine was called the Alligator, and the Alligator was lost in a storm. And the U.S. Navy has spent a lot of time and money searching for the Alligator off the coast of the Carolinas. They have no idea where it is. It's an area of shifting sands. I don't know if it'll ever be found because it's probably buried, and that means magnetometers and sides. The advantage of side scan is we can look very long distances with very high resolution. A magnetometer is very limited in its range, so you have to do more survey lines, and if you don't know where you're looking, it's very hard to understand the magnitude of the search. But before that submarine was built, there was a prototype that the Navy viewed and was demonstrated to check out the possibility, and that happened in the Delaware River. That prototype eventually disappeared. There were rumors that it had been hidden in a marsh, and there's a historian, her name is Alice Smith, who spent the last 20 years researching the history of this. And the last 15 years, I've been helping her doing searches in various places. And one of the last places to look was in a freshwater marsh off the Delaware River. I honestly didn't believe we had a shot at finding it there because it's really shallow. But I said the only way to do this is with an aerial drone. So they raised funds. We hired a company that I knew from previous work. They used a drone to fly a magnetometer over a fairly large area of this marsh. And lo and behold, in the middle of the marsh, there was a significant, and I'll use the technical term, it's a whammer-jammer magnetic anomaly. I mean, it's big. And the size of the anomaly matches what we would expect from the mass, the iron mass of that submarine. So we may have found another Civil War submarine. The question is it? And we've got plans to go back this winter, use ground penetrating radar when the marsh is frozen, and get some idea of the dimensions and things of that nature. It's going to be exciting.
That is super exciting. Maybe you can say a little bit about how side scan sonar technology has changed since you started.
So when I started, there was no GPS. We take that for granted now. I can see where I am on my phone, my car drives maps. There was none of that. The sonar systems were primitive, but the imagery was good. It was not integrated with position, so you basically had to either put buoys down and drive in between buoys or use what we call Loran-C. There were some other ways to navigate, microwave navigation systems, things like that. As technology developed, we went from these very large, ungainly systems with very flimsy printouts to thermal paper, integrating position, and eventually you had a computer that interfaced with the sonar, and now everything appears on a computer screen. So the technology has advanced, even though the basic concept, which was improved upon by Marty Klein, is still the same. It's amazing how good some of that imagery from the 70s, really is. But now everything is integrated with position. We can do measurements. Everything is corrected. The computer adjusts the image. On those old printers, it would take me a day just to
Mm-hmm.
train people how to get the image to appear. That's
Mm-hmm.
not analyzing the data, that's just getting the image to appear. So there have been a lot of changes. And now, as I mentioned before, we have robots that just go off and do the surveys, and we just drink coffee.
But imagine you still have to mow the lawn to a certain degree, though.
The robot is mowing the lawn. So the
Yeah.
robot is navigating underwater and runs a search pattern collecting the data. We are not at the point where we can transmit that data in real time back to
Mm-hmm.
the vessel because of the volume of data. We can transmit snippets to make sure, it's working. When I say snippets, those are just small images of the sonar waterfall. But that time is coming. The biggest thing we have now also is using computer for analysis. We use artificial intelligence, deep learning, and we're starting to teach computers to analyze the sonar data. So I'm out of a job. This was back in 2000, Woods Hole launched the first practical UUV. When I say practical, I mean the military had some secret stuff and whatnot, but practical commercial UUV called the Remus 100. And I said, that will never replace a towed system. And those systems now are working all over the world.
There are several different types of underwater robots, right? There's ROVs, AUVs, UUVs. Now there's USVs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And maybe we can spell that out for people.
So AUV is autonomous underwater vehicle. That is a robot that you put into the water. It is not connected to the vessel in any way other than acoustic transmissions. We can send it commands. And it runs the survey pattern on its own. An ROV is remotely operated vehicle. That is a robot where a pilot on the vessel is flying and operating that vehicle. ASV is autonomous surface vehicle. So those ride on the surface and they are autonomous as well. Sometimes they're controlled, sometimes not. I was just at the University of New Hampshire a month ago, and in their operations center, they were running 2 ASVs, autonomous surface vehicles, over the horizon off of Cape Cod doing some mapping. And they pretty much were just monitoring. The vehicles were off doing their own thing. They had cameras, they have radar, they have infrared sensors, and this is all being transmitted by satellite back to the university. Now robots are here. And the artificial intelligence, I said there is no way a computer can ever analyze sonar data, and now it is. So here we are.
It's amazing to think of where this is all heading. But you still need humans involved because humans have to do some of this work as well, right?
Working at sea is a difficult thing.
Mm-hmm.
There are companies now who are trying to have totally autonomous operations. In other words, the ship goes out, launches vehicles, recovers vehicles. It does everything autonomously. But any of us who understand what it takes to operate at sea and how many things go wrong knows you have to have people to fix things, to handle emergencies. I can give you an example. One of those ASVs that UNH, University of New Hampshire, was running, all of a sudden snagged a ghost fishnet in its propeller. They had to send somebody out to rescue it. So things like that happen all the time. And the company that was trying to be totally autonomous is slowly rethinking they're going to have some crew on board. And crew are expensive, and you have to change them out, and these are very tedious, long operations. So the human is critical, but also expensive, and in some ways a liability. You have to
Hmm.
feed them, they have to sleep. Every month or so you have to let them go ashore, or they get grumpy. And
And there's that whole safety factor as well.
yes, yes, absolutely.
What would you say to anyone who might be interested in a career in marine science or, helping out on marine projects or archaeological projects? Because I understand that lay people can also get involved.
They can. They can. As I said, the whole Rado effort was done by volunteers, advocational volunteers, did that entire project. We did bring in one professional archaeologist to, supervise. Um, I would say don't get frustrated. None of this is easy. None of this is going to come to be given to you. You have to want it, and you have to go get it. It took me years and years to be successful. Um, there are many hurdles. There are numerous ways you can get involved. Involved as a volunteer, there are so many different career paths. Once you have that goal in mind, focus on it, stick to it, and it'll happen. But don't expect it to happen without a lot of work. Everything that I've accomplished is because of a team. As an individual, you're pushing forward, but there were so many people who helped me, and there on these projects, there's no one person who can do the entire project. It's a team effort. So look for groups of people who can work together and who will help you. And then once you've made it, turn around and help somebody else make it.
So maybe to wrap up, you can sort of say how you've felt about your career and working with shipwrecks and all of the people that you've known and worked with over the years.
It has been an extremely rich career. I've been very fortunate to have done things that most people don't get to do. I love what I did. I love what I do. It has been more than a career. It has been very challenging. It required me to evolve and change a number of times. When I say change, you change your focus, you change how you do things. Equipment is evolving. But to me, it's been worth it. And I've actually been, in the end, able to put food on the table as well. So it's been a good career.
Oh, that's super, Vince. This has been extremely fascinating on a subject that I'm very, very passionate about. So it's
I
been
know
so
you
great.
are.
It's been so great to have you here. Thanks again so much for your time.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Lost in time, the wreckage lies, broken masts and shattered pride. In the deep the answers hide. Echoes of the past call out, whispers from beneath the waves. What secrets do the shadows keep?